set up the scene, I dragged in an image and rescaled it. On top of that image was applied a curve to make it a little more darker, and a hue and saturation just to pull out some of the colors. And above that was applied this grunge layer, and nothing was applied to this grunge layer, just using soft light, and for transparency, 78% or wherever you like. We're going to create running drops coming down on a faux window in front of the scene. In another lesson, we'll use particle systems to simulate raindrops falling. I'm going to create a new composition. New composition, and this is going to be the rain. This will be the water stream. And click OK. And to create that, I'm going to use basic shapes, such as this rounded rectangle. Now I'll create it right in the middle. A luminosity effect is going to be applied, so everything should be thought of as going from black to white or any gray scale in between. I'll make this white. I'm going to click on the fill to make this a gradient, and I'm going to choose a linear gradient like this. And I'll pull in the handle edge, make it a little softer around there. Later on in this effect, I'll apply a fastbox blur to soften this up. With the same shape layer selected, I'm going to draw out the same shape again, just a little smaller to be the tip. And now on top of all this, I'll apply a fastbox blur. And that's just to soften out the edges of this. To animate this, I'm going to use a displacement. So turbulent displace. And now I'll animate the position of this one drop by dragging it up. Same position key, and going forward a few frames. Let's say 1 second later, maybe 2 seconds later. I'm holding down the Control, Shift, and right arrow to advance the timeline by increments of 10. Right now, this is the drop. Somewhere in the middle, I'll stop and take a look at the settings for turbulent displacement. If I decrease the size of turbulent displacement, like this, it'll be more localized to this effect. If I decrease the amount, less waves to more wavies, and it depends upon the look that you're trying to go for. So play with the amount and size. Next setting that you could play with is complexity. The more complex, the more sharper the edges are, and you can see that this effect great for doing fire, and we'll have a future video on that. But here, not so interested in so much fiery look, but more of this watery effect. Maybe I'll try number 2. So that's one of them. I want this to happen many times. I also want it to loop. I don't want this to instantly loop. I want to pause before it continues. So out here, let's say frame 100, I'll put another key that's just holding its place. And now I'll click here and apply loop out by option clicking or alt clicking to expose the place where you can add code. And I'll select loop out, or I would type in loop out. And this is what we have so far. Now that I have this one, I'm going to duplicate it. Before I duplicate it, I'm going to pre-compose it. This way I can easily distribute the water droplets falling. So going under layer, pre-compose, and falling drop. I'm going to make sure to move all the attributes inside, which will move the fastbox blur and the turbulent displacement on the inside of this. And now I'm going to duplicate these. Control D or Command D. I'll offset them, and I'll reposition them as well. Or Command D, move it over. I'll select all of them, and I'll go under Layer, and I'll call it the final falling drop. I'll place the same turbulent displace. Without this on here, you can see it's very linear. With this on here, it's affecting the overall layer, so it just gives us this extra boost of displacement, and you can still play with the distortion and the size and the complexity of it as well. It's a concept. So I'm going to go to my final layer and drag out the water stream layer, which contains the pre-composition of all the drops. And when I play that layer, you see these white streaks come on down, and we'll use those white streaks. I'm interested in getting these white streaks to distort what's behind it. And that's what water does with refractions. Let me just pull this out here. I'm going to combine these two layers because I want these two layers to act as what will be refracted, these two layers, and go under Layer, Pre-Compose, and I'll call this my background layer. Next, on top of the background layer, I'll apply glass as an effect, CC glass, for a stylized effect, and I'll apply that to the background layer. And instantly, without changing the settings, it puffs out everything. And that's not what we want. But you can see that CC glass on its own can have this bubbly effect to your artwork, so something to explore and play with. Here, I'm interested in first turning off this water stream layer to hide it, going to CC glass, going under surface, and for the bump map, I don't want the bump map to be the background, I want it to be the water stream layer. By doing that, you can see now the refraction created by those streaks of water. There are a few settings to play with, like softness and displacement. However, to get this to really work, if I go under the original water stream and I change the opacity very low, such as 20, and I go to my final, there doesn't seem to be that much effect happening. If I go back here, back to water stream and make it full value, and go here, we don't see much of an effect happening either. However, if I go and create a new solid background, such as a black background, and put it behind here, then when I go to my final, you can see that there is change happening. Now, to better see all this, I'm going to put my composition side by side. To do that, I'm going to lock this. So after you lock this composition, right-click in this area, or Control-click if you're under a Mac, and go under New Viewer. And now you have two compositions side by side, the original lock one, which is our main timeline. And for this one, I'm going to click into the water stream. And now that's the water stream. So now we can see updates. Timelines are locked, meaning that when the playback head moves here, it also will move it out of the main timeline. So let's see the cause and effect of having a background. With the background off, the water drop becomes all flattened out. With this background on, it's sharp and it looks more like this original image. And then also with opacity, as I take down opacity here, as soon as I let go, the one on the left side will update. If I turn off the background again on this one and change its alpha, so changing the transparency of the water drop doesn't affect the CC glass. The only thing that will affect the CC glass is when you have a solid background, and then it can read this composition layer properly, where transparency will have an effect, and so will the other parameters here. So this is one reason why you would want to put your compositions side by side. To get out of this mode, I'm going to just click on this little X here to close that composition. Clicking on the lock to making sure this view doesn't go away. Then control click or right click, new viewer. And then selecting the composition to be flung into this viewer. I'm going to close this again. I'm going to bring back the original raindrop color by hitting Control D to duplicate this water droplet layer, turn it back on, making this layer, now that it has a solid background, so making this layer with its color mode to be lighten only, or use lighten. You can see if you focus in on here, so add a little bit of lightness to this layer.